Hi everyone. You are listening to Handcuff Status, the podcast and platform for the truth-telling of folks impacted by the carceral system, where we break the chains of injustice that imprisonment creates. My name is Sydney, and I am your host for today with WallStreet Wes, who is a poet and from Cleveland, Ohio, who uses his talent and experience to enlighten and bring awareness in the community about prison reform. And today we're going to be talking about post-incarceration syndrome. Welcome, WallStreet Wes. How are you today?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm in the building because I'm into building.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is true. So I just want to check in. I like to ask this question just in relation to this topic. How does or what does freedom mean to you?
Um, I believe that for me, freedom may be different for your average person um, because it's everything at this point. It has no limits from spending the majority of my life being incarcerated to now is like, man, everything is freedom, like just feeling the wind on my face or being able to go outside at nighttime. It's just like, I could just talk all day about, what freedom really is to me for real.
Mm, yeah, that's a beautiful perspective. Thank you a lot for sharing that, and I'm happy that you get to live in that expansive experience of freedom.
For sure.
So let's dive in. You're here to talk to us a bit about post incarceration syndrome. And I'm curious about what it is. What is post incarceration syndrome? And how does it affect individuals who have been released from prison?
For sure. Post incarceration syndrome is something that's not been labeled as a diagnosis yet, but is it in fact a symptom of being released from prison? The way I got familiar with post incarceration syndrome, when I got released from prison, I felt alive. I felt great. I felt impeccable. And I felt like I was really ready for the world. Not too long after I was released, I felt my mental health declining, and I wasn't sure what was really going on with me. So I started seeking help. I searched high and low for help to no avail. I would go to therapists. I would, go to my parole officer. I was going to the mountaintops and going to the valleys, just really trying to find help to find out what was really going on in my mind. And most therapists would just tell me like, "Oh, you just have PTSD." But as I studied PTSD, I didn't connect with it. I said, "I don't have PTSD." It's not everyone is just so used to saying PTSD because it's a known phrase. But my spirit was like, I don't agree with this. So because I couldn't find the help, I started searching high and low to be able to create the help for myself. And within doing that, a man named Damian Calver introduced me to something called post incarceration syndrome. And I was like, yes, this is what it is. And it's really what a person experiences once they are released. A lot of times there's a idea put out that a person becomes so damaged by prison that once he's released, that he has institutionalized behaviors. He has a lot of different symptoms going on in his mind because of abuse. And even though that is true for certain people, that demographic is a very small amount of people that's incarcerated. You only have a very small percentage of people that's experiencing abuse or any type of um, super traumas or physical traumas while they're incarcerated. Whereas a post incarceration syndrome is a detox. Like when you spend a lengthy amount of time in prison, you detox. And even when you do research on post incarceration syndrome, you could tell that they're onto something, but it needs so much more research. And that's why I've been connecting with different mental health facilities and different hospitals, trying to get a deeper understanding of what post incarceration syndrome is, because the message right now that's being put out into the world that it's only for people who've experienced abuse. And, that's not the full case, not the full picture. It's a broader scope to be addressed, and that's what I'm aiming to do.
Mm. It's funny that you mentioned that because when Sheldon had named this as a topic, I was like, oh, this sounds. My automatic mind was like, oh, it sounds like PTSD, but I was like, but it's not PTSD because it has its own name and it has its own experiences. And like you said your own experience. There was like a high, like you were like, oh, I'm out, like this is good, and then followed by like a deeper trench of like other like symptoms like depression, anxiety. And I would love to know what are the common symptoms of post incarceration syndrome? Whether those are the ones that showed up in your life or the other folks who you've engaged with, and how can that impact a person's life after their release? You said that there's that detox. I think that language is really fascinating. I would love to hear more.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the symptoms that I personally experienced was, anxiety at an alarming rate, panic attacks at an alarming rate, and across the board, what most people end up doing is they end up self medicating. Like
Mm,
most people, they get into drinking real heavy. They get into smoking real heavy because your average person feels all of these symptoms, but they don't know what's happening. And then by you being told that it's just PTSD, that you really being misdiagnosed. Whereas
mm,
the difference between post incarceration syndrome and PTSD is PTSD might have one symptom, whereas post incarceration syndrome might have 100 symptoms at one time. And it's like an overload, psychologically and mentally, to where it increases and becomes even worse because no one's really familiar with this term. So no one really knows how to care for someone after being home from prison. Most organizations focus on jobs and
mm,
housing and things of that nature, whereas there is nowhere that focuses on the mental health of someone after being released from prison. Um, so that's where it makes it even worse, and that's what makes it intensifies on so many different levels. Um, and that's just like some of the main things that I know I've experienced personally. Is just like if I go to the grocery store and I want to get some cereal,
mm,
but it's so many options that I can't. It overwhelms me.
mm,
Like my first day home, I got taken on a shopping spree. And it was like whatever I wanted. It was like exactly what a person would want with coming home and had that type of support system where I could go on a shopping spree and have anything that I want. But I was overwhelmed, and I'm
mm,
overwhelmed a lot. So many different things overwhelms me. But I believe that when we talk about the symptoms of post incarceration syndrome, it's not a mental defect. It's
mm,
just really based on the fact of that there is no real help psychologically for people coming home from prison and you being misunderstood. You being misunderstood by everybody from your family to society. And then there's such a stigma on you because you are a felon that most people don't feel like you deserve to be traumatized. Or most people don't feel like you deserve to be psychologically unbalanced. And for me, what really made this anxiety and these panic attacks even more intense was that when you go to prison, they tell you like, you've done wrong, you've committed a crime, society is not committing crimes. So they paint a picture of you of what society really is. This is how people are moving in society. People don't commit crimes, people don't do this. So me, I was someone who really took accountability for myself. I was a young man, so I took accountability for myself. I knew I did wrong. So it gave me the space to really spend my time developing and gaining the pro social skills and all of the character traits that you would want a person to gain while they're in prison so they don't keep on committing those crimes. So where my troubles came in, that is that once I was released from society, I'm moving how I was programmed to move as far as, having empathy for people, caring and being courteous, and all of my criminal ways was behind me. So I'm moving at high levels of spirituality. I'm moving at high levels of intellect. But what I came across was that most people in society is not moving like that. And
Mm.
that's what's really started damaging me psychologically, because I learned that I prepared myself so much so I could be back to society and prepare myself for society. But when I got in society and I was around those that I loved, I was filled with so much heartache and pain because they wasn't thinking like that. They had no problem taking advantage of me, or dismissing my any old feelings. If I felt any type of feeling as a human being, they're gonna dismiss it like, oh, he's just institutionalized. Well, he's just crazy. Not allowing me to actually have feelings, not allowing me to actually have real experiences that bother me. If I was on the phone with my mother, and naturally, it's a natural thing when, some women like to gossip. So if I express to my mother, like, when we talk, all you do is gossip and I don't want to gossip, her response is, oh, Wes, you need some help. You just crazy. So now I'm being painted a picture as if I'm crazy. So I start believing it. I really start believing that prison had really set me off in a way that I couldn't recover from. But then after spending years and years and years of like really studying post incarceration syndrome within myself, I came to the conclusion that, man, I wasn't the one tripping.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all, but society convinced me that I was tripping. And anytime that I displayed character traits of being human, they just dismissed it and convinced me that I really had psychological issues. But it was just like the mental health part comes in at trying to fit back into society, only to find out that you never will.
Mm. Mm. That's really big. What I'm hearing from you, and I hear this in your story, is that there's a lot of support. Like, there's a lot of support for folks. I mean, I'm not saying a lot because I actually don't know from experience, but there's support around for folks to find jobs after they get out of prison. There's support for folks to maybe, I don't know, like find a good doctor, etc. once they leave. However, there's no transition from how to like mentally adjust from being in one specific social context to like a whole nother social context. And we were even just sort of talking about this before, but just technology, like things like that. How are you going to be able to find your place and footing when you've sort of been um, explicitly kept out and kept away from particular um, certain ways in which like society moves forward, and like that transition aspect, what I'm hearing from your story is that transition aspect is critical. And we see that often where folks who leave prison and who don't know how to manage like the emotions that show up, and don't know how to fully like integrate because there aren't the supports to actually assist them with integrating. um, there can be like the alcoholism or taking drugs or doing things to numb yourself down. And unfortunately, that's like a very, I think, well created pathway that feeds the prison system of like folks aren't supported when they come out, so then they end up going right back in. And then there are those stories like your story and many other stories where folks are able to witness and like find a certain strength and like um internal, what's the word, it's like you're finding like a sense of like deep balance and understanding of how to operate that then sort of like can be its own sort of isolation, because then you realize certain people aren't there either. um, that's just what's showing up for me in hearing your converse and hearing you speak about that. um, I'm very curious to know what are some of the risk factors that can contribute to the development of post incarceration syndrome. Is this something that like you observed has happened within like particular populations of folks? Like, are there contexts in which these symptoms might be more highlighted or more, yeah, more highlighted?
I personally believe that everyone who has experienced prison will experience it. But even when you study post incarceration syndrome, they paint a picture as if only a certain type of person experience it.
Mm.
But the reality of it is that everyone experiences it, you know. And what happens is some of the things that you will see is violence. It's a very violent nature because one of the things that feeds the post incarceration syndrome is that a lot of men who come from prison, you know, we used to be in a violent environment. We used to handle the situations with aggression. So when you come home and you really are trying to be a citizen and you please excuse me and you using manners, what happens is you start feeling like that everyone starts taking advantage of that. And you just like you in your mind, you thinking like, man, like do you know what I'm capable of? And you just really, and it's just like that's something you experience where it seems like everybody is poking the bear, no matter where you turn, from kids to loved ones, they poking the bear, and then you explode. And then when you finally explode, people are like, look, see, I told you he ain't changed. I see he the same type of person. So it's really like it's psychological more than anything. Just um, you do have a class of people in prison who go through so much abuse that when they come out of here, they're no good, you know. But what I try to explain to people that it's different classes of people that's incarcerated, where it's just like you got some people who go to prison, and prison has a really bad effect on them. You got people like me who prison allowed me the opportunity to have to gain an intellectual understanding of my individuality. So
Mm.
I'm moving and I'm operating on frequencies that most human beings are not, because most human beings are just going through the flow. They never have a time to ground themselves in their individuality. So it puts you at a disadvantage in society because when your average person is moving around on borrowed knowledge, on
Mm.
borrowed information, they don't have a clue on who they are as a person. So then when you come across somebody like me who is very in tune, all of those character traits that I developed for the sake of my reentry, it is manipulated to seem as if um, it's manipulated to seem as if that I have issues, you
Mm.
know. And the reality of it is that, man, I don't. All of my issues are developing from, you know, it's developing socially, you know. And now what makes me sad and what takes me through all these emotional roller coasters is just really seeing the state that this world is in. You
Mm.
know, and just seeing how people are operating and seeing their hearts and seeing how they don't believe and seeing, you know, that they don't trust. So like after being in prison and being conditioned to start being that type of person and then being released out into the world and you trying to spread that message like, hey, you can do better, you know, things could get good. And everyone automatically puts a stigma on you because you're in prison, because you've been to prison. So
Mm.
now it creates mental health issues because it's like you being blackballed from society. But the reality of it is that you are, because there's something called collateral sanctions. And collateral sanctions exist in the law. Whereas in the law, United States, it is said that once a person commits a felony conviction, you are no longer considered a human being. You know,
Mm.
you are ordered to something called civil death. And as I live my life, I feel it. And that's what the post incarceration syndrome is, that I'm really having to face the fact that no one looks at me like a human being no more. I can feel it. You know, I
Mm.
can feel my mother being ashamed of me low key, even though she's saying she's not. I can tell that she don't respect me. And no matter where I go, no matter how much good I do in my community, no matter how much right I do, people always look at me as less than, only because I have a felony, not by the content of my character. But on
Mm.
my felony alone, it disqualifies me from being human. It disqualifies me from having any type of true compassion for my fellow community. And you can only do nothing but spiral out of control psychologically.
Mm.
You know,
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
like even today, I'm trying my hardest to, like, today is one of those days where I'm just like trying to hold on. You know, like my family life is not happy, and no matter how much I try to implement structure and try to build the children up to be better people, it's a constant resistance. It's a constant treating me as if, you know, I don't know what I'm talking about or I don't know what's really going on. So it's like making me feel like an outcast in society. And the only time I'm truly happy is when I'm alone.
Mm.
And I don't when I went through depressions where I just ran and hid for like 90 days where I was just scared to come outside. And so people would think like, oh, you went through depression, that stemmed from being in prison. Like, no, it stemmed from being out here in this free world. And it's just like that's why you see certain guys who go back in prison, because not because they just can't get it right or because they institutionalized. Because for a lot of us, when we was in prison is when we had the most peace, because we didn't have to deal with nobody truly but ourselves. I could lock down in my cell and I just had me and God. But now that I'm out here in society, I just can't connect with most people just on the strength that most people can't connect with themselves.
Mm.
So all of my psychological issues that I'm going through is really being developed the more and more I'm into society. Is like my rehabilitation is working against me.
Whew, I had to take a breath there because I think what you're sharing challenges so many notions or beliefs about like what freedom is, what belonging is. It also challenges the notion that like reintegration is possible because y'all have to reintegrate into quote unquote free society as opposed to free society actually integrating you, and I think that's where that resistance comes in of like, oh, like no, we can't trust so and so because they were in prison, or like clearly they're out of their minds, but it doesn't give validity to the truth of that. Like, and at the end of the day, like, we're humans, we're social creatures, and we're going to go where we can find belonging. And if we can't nurture belonging within our own families, and you have that belonging elsewhere, I mean, where are you going to go? And like that's where the isolation comes in, etc. And yeah, it seems like I would love to know, and I would have no doubt other folks would love to know how you took care of yourself and how you continue to take care of yourself as you move through like what it means to navigate the world out here, um, out here with all of your experience and all of like the wisdom that you hold. What do you do to take care of yourself in that space, keep you balanced?
What I do to get to take care of myself in that space has really been like a long time coming. It took me a long time to figure it out. It took me crashing out a lot. It took me being violent a lot. It took me crying a lot. It took me hiding a lot. It took me going back to jail. But I believe that because I'm a poet, I have a unique advantage that most human beings just don't have. And that's why I'm working so hard to spread this message, because I know I believe that I am superior mentally on so many different levels. So if I'm having these struggles, I can only imagine someone who isn't as strong as me mentally. But because I'm a poet, I'm emotionally intelligent.
Mm,
And when I feel something, it sends me on a quest to get to the root of what I'm feeling and why
mm,
I'm feeling those things. And one of the things that helped me was being able to identify what I was feeling, because I could just be feeling something and it could be driving me crazy, and I'm not feeling back well until I drink alcohol or until I smoke weed. But it wasn't until I was able to identify the feelings. Like I was able to identify, like, this is a panic attack, or this is a anxiety attack I'm having. It wasn't until I was able to identify what was happening to me psychologically that I was able to start being able to cope. And then from there, I just come up with so many different tactics that help myself. Like I listen to certain music that feeds my spirit and gives me
mm,
a deeper trust in God. I do things like throughout my house, I turn my TVs into screensavers to where I go on YouTube and I put on like oceans and water, and I put on music throughout the house with my Alexa, and I'm constantly feeding my subconscious to not give in. And I try to take those emotions and those feelings and I try to turn them around in a form of fashion of really helping other people. And that's what really helps me, is by helping other people who have been incarcerated balance themselves, and find peace in their own individuality, in their own world. Um, but it's just, I'm very big on just getting to the root of things, and it's hard and it's not easy. And every day it's a struggle because every day I'm being challenged in ways that's really unnecessary, in my opinion. You know, like for the last 6 months, I've been trying to find housing, and we got all these organizations that, they pride themselves in finding housings for guys who's been incarcerated. But for the last 6 months, for the last 8 months, matter of fact, I apologize. You know, I've had a struggle with that. Like, and everyone is turning me down because I have a felony. So because I have a felony, I don't deserve to have nowhere to stay.
Mm.
Um, so it's just me. I just do a lot of deep work on myself. Sometimes I might listen to one song for like a month straight because that song feeds my spirit in a way that I really need it. Like right now, I'm listening to a song by Pink Sweats called "I Feel Good," and
Mm.
the song sings about, just really focusing on the beauty of life. When the sun's shining, and the vibrancies of the community. And I just really am in a space where I'm programming myself to be stronger than my reality.
Mm. Mm. I want to take a second to celebrate what's happening, because I don't think it's every day that, one, you hear a conversation or you hear Black men talking about what it means to be emotionally intelligent and emotionally in tune and like vulnerable and allowing yourself to feel. Um, but to specifically have a Black man who had experienced incarceration and is experiencing the ongoing impacts of that in a way that's really like assisting folks and will allow folks who might be feeling this to be like, whoa, like, I don't know what it is that I'm feeling. I don't know if there's language for it, so I'm just going to do whatever. Like, this is a really beautiful model. Um, and so I'm just grateful to have that experience. Um, I would love, this was not a part of the questions that we set for you, but you keep mentioning it, and it's an important part of who you are, like your poetry. Um, when when did you start to write poetry, and how, if it has, how has that played a role within your own like wellness, taking care of yourself, keeping yourself in touch with like your spirit?
Um, for me, I could tell that poetry was a gift. No one ever taught me how to write poetry. I just always knew how, and I had a deep understanding of how to write poetry. And when I went to prison, I had a girlfriend. I was 21 years old. I had a girlfriend, and I began to write her poetry in hopes that I would write a poem so good that would make her stay with me while I did my 10 years. But God put it in my spirit that, it would be selfish of me to ask a young lady to do 10 years with me, especially when I was taking accountability for myself. So for 10 years, I never started writing her poetry. But what ended up happening was I started teaching other prisoners poetry everywhere I went. No matter what prison they put me in, I started teaching other prisoners poetry, and I revolutionized. I changed the whole culture of the prison system with poetry because I was teaching men poetry in hopes that they could learn how to be better communicators instead of being violent.
Hmm.
I had a vision that in hopes that if we could learn to express how we feel, then maybe we won't have to lash out or be violent when we don't understand what's really happening with it psychologically. So in my incarceration, I had became so legendary behind the initiatives that I had did with poetry that when I was released from prison, I had to support the whole prison system. And to this day, I still had that support of prison systems, and I travel the world doing poetry. I create poetry experiences for mental health facilities, hospitals, prison systems, high schools, and I use my gift of poetry as a natural way to help people ground themselves psychologically. Because for me, being able to express my poetry is like the only time I really feel heard. It's only through a poem. Like my normal conversation, I have so much on my mind that people just look at me like I talk too much. But it's only in my poetry where I truly feel hurt. And I feel like people really hear my plights and people really hear what's going on with me psychologically. So I use that in hopes that, someone will really hear me and give me the help that I really need. But in the meantime, I've just been creating the help on my own. Since I couldn't find the help, I started creating the help. I hold peer-on-peer mediation groups for guys who've been in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I go to mental health facilities and I sit down with licensed therapists and I create poetry programs for other people who's been just as involved. And poetry is my ministry. If I was a religious man, poetry will be my church.
Mm-hmm. Mm. That's beautiful. I'm This is an invitation. You can decline, you can accept, because this wasn't expected or a part of the interview. But if you memorize any of your poetry or if you have your poems on you, I mean, there's an open invitation if you want to share on the podcast.
Oh yeah, I would love to. I actually have the unique ability where I write all my poetry in my head. I never sit down with pen and paper. I've been writing poetry in my
Whoa, that's wild.
mind.
Yeah.
I haven't sat down with a pen and paper since 2009. So everything is in my mind. So I'm always ready to share at all times. The poem that I want to share with you is um, I thought I went through a depression. Like I was dating a girl. I seen she just didn't want the same things out of life I did. So when I tried to break up with her, it was just like, the wrath of God came down on me because she was just like went at me so hard. And I became so frightened because I realized that there was nothing, there was nothing to protect me. It was so many different things in place that protected society from people who've been to prison, but there was nothing in place to protect someone who'd been to prison from society. So I hid and I just ran and I thought that I was going through depression, but I was really sad. I was just sad at the state of the world. I was sad at how people treated me. And I was sad beyond belief. And I was like that for 90 days. On top of, since I've been home, I've had to start over 15 times to where I build myself up to where I have really nice homes, cars, clothes. I build myself up to be rich. And then just like that, it's taken away from me. And it's happened to me 15 times. So I sat in this apartment and I just cried one morning and I asked God, why? Like, why do I keep on losing like this? And God put in my spirit, like, man, you're not losing. I'm delivering you, and you need to recognize that you're being delivered and see it for what it is and know that most people can't bounce back one time. So for you to sit here and say you fell off 15 times, I need you to see that as proof that I'm relevant in your life. I'm here. I'm with you. I'm going through everything with you. It's all gonna make sense in the end. So right after I received that revelation, I wrote this poem right here. This morning I finally cried, reflecting on all of the times that I had to start over. But thank God, Jehovah, my heart's holder, that my heart rovers through hard times. Though part sober, no man can say that I aren't soldier in hard times. I mark boulders in hard times. Like WallStreet Wes was hearing the name of the Lord on the floor, that on the shoulders of hard times. All the while trying not to let my body language speak or show that it's hard times. But you could thank my damn parents that I'm transparent, so this isn't a show. It's hard times. But because I stand tall at all times, oh geez, give me so many stripes. Oh geez. Got my attire looking like a tiger in hard times. And I won't front like I don't tire in hard times. Air pressure low and my tires in hard times. Which makes it hard for me to come places where being complacent is all fine. You may wonder, why am I so hard on myself? Always giving me such a hard time. Because I realized that the pressure is all mine when that depression was all mine. But thank God no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Disarm you hard times, now that weapon is all mine. But what if that weapon was our minds? demise. Them eyes tells me everything that you are willing to disguise. Surprise. So now I'm to a point where I no longer care how you're depicting me as long as you can picture me rolling through hard times. And that's facts. So now when I go to the Lord, I no longer ask for a lighter burden. I pray for a stronger back. Pump.
Whew. Mm. Giving you a big hug. Giving you a big, big virtual
Take
hug.
it. I take it.
Oh man.
Mm.
Sometimes, yeah, that weapon is this.
Uh,
It's this.
what if that weapon was our mind?
Mm, that's a big one. Wow.
Uh,
God blessed you with the gifts of words.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Do you want to pause
No, I'm
before we
fine.
continue? You're good? Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Wow, that was beautiful. Yeah, I'm just thank you for putting your experiences and making your experiences into such a beautiful art form and sharing it with the world because I think many folks need to hear that.
Thank
Many
you.
folks need to hear that. You mentioned some of the things that you've been doing since you left prison, with like mediation groups, and just like helping folks and creating the support systems that you realized were lacking after you left. And I'm curious if you know if there are any specific resources or support groups for individuals who are dealing with post incarceration syndrome, or even supports for family and community members to help integrate folks who are experiencing these symptoms in a way that transforms the conditions and allows for like actual
Can
integration,
you hear me? You
actual
froze
healing.
up.
All right, we are back after some technical difficulties. I was just asking WallStreet Wes about if there are any specific resources or support groups available for individuals who are dealing with post incarceration syndrome, or even resources for families and communities to help support folks who have recently left and will need support in integrating in a way that allows for actual healing.
Here in Cleveland, Ohio, I don't. There is none. I've personally been working over the years trying to develop groups for people who have post incarceration syndrome as well as families. But I've just hitting brick wall after brick wall because I'm having a hard time developing the funding and the real support. Um, Through the funding, I just can't, like, the grant process is too much for me. I get overwhelmed and they make you jump through so many hoops that I get burned out. So I find myself just doing informal groups where I'm just like kind of being a therapist to people on my own right, and I learned that just talking to other people who have been in prison is the only time I feel understood, the only time I really feel heard. In other states, I see people holding support groups for post incarceration syndrome, but I don't believe they're authentic. I don't believe that it's because it's being ran by like people who have maybe are loved ones to people who have been locked up. So the substance of it, I don't think is on point. And then when I try to reach out to those people to try to put it on point, it's just they get defensive. They're really not trying to hear my perspective. So from my belief, man, there is no real help, and that's I've dedicated my life. Like I own business. I used to own businesses. I used to travel the world with my different businesses, and I stopped all of them so I could dedicate my entire life to the mental health and well being of people who have been in prison. And usually, when I try to connect with nonprofit organizations and things of that nature, um, it's a disconnect. When I try to tell them what the real issues are, it's just like they treat me as if they know better.
Mm.
and I try to even like do things to offset post incarceration syndrome by going inside the prisons and feeding their self esteem. A lot of times when because I have such great access to the prison system, my phone rings off the hook with everybody like, I want to go inside and tell my story. And I'm like, man, these guys don't want to hear your story, man. They need help. They need love. They need compassion. And when I go
Mm.
in there, I'm not telling no story, nothing like that. I'm bringing opportunities. I'm caring for them. I'm hugging. I'm laughing. And I'm giving them the things that you are stripped of when you're in prison. And that's a sense of purpose. So, excuse me. So I've been working diligently and trying to create these things, but I'm just having the hardest time
Mm.
really getting it off the ground.
Mm. This is this is important, and this is something that when Sheldon and I were working and building handcuff status, we wanted to keep in mind of like, because there are so many stories where people experience harm or trauma or incarceration, and they know they're like, I want to help, but then there's like, I don't have the resources, or my capacity isn't nourished so I can do the work I want to do. So I'm going to put out a little request now. If you are someone who's listening to this podcast and you know of any support resources, or you have gifts and talents with like grant writing, with experience with nonprofits, or experience to help community grassroots organizations get money, get funds in order to support them in doing this work, please, 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 at the end of the show, we'll share where to reach out to WallStreet Wes, how to connect with him, where to find him, and all of his brilliance, and handcuff status as well, so we can ensure that folks feel supported, like there's a community being built, so then you can do the magical work that like you should, and you deserve those resources. And I know that there's somebody out here in this world who has the skills and talents to assist in those spaces. So there's my ask to all the listeners out there: if you have any gifts, skills, and talents that you would be willing to offer to support WallStreet West and to support other community organizers in really supporting folks who have been incarcerated and supporting their loved ones, please, please, please reach out to us. You'll find all of our information um, at the end of this episode, and you'll also find it in like the podcast description area. So I just wanted to name that because it's important. It's
And
very important that you're resourced.
a lot of things that I come across is, I'm very effective at dealing with people who are just involved. Like my track record is like impeccable almost. Like people really depend on me. People really trust in me as an individual. But what happens is that usually when I connect with other people, they overcomplicate my process, or they try to change my mind to redirect it in a form of fashion that's cliche.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I'm focusing on things as being overlooked, things as being underappreciated, and I don't want to just do what most people do in the nonprofit world. It's like a certain language and a certain lingo
Like
that
a
everybody is you.
posturing.
Yeah, so it's just like I understand that I have a unique perspective through my experience, and everyone is trying to put me inside of their box. Whereas I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling them like what I'm doing over here, it's been working for a long time, and I can show you countless people who depend on me psychologically.
Mm-hmm. 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 And I think we want to start to build the skills and build up the capacity, so then community organizing that doesn't have to become a like 501(c)(f nonprofit, like folks who are in direct relationship with the folks who need support, like are at capacity, so then they can help build up the capacity of the folks that they're working with. I think that that's the juice of it. um yeah, going into the nonprofit structure and everything is like a whole nother conversation. It's messy, it's messy for a very good reason, to keep people out of it. But we won't go there for now. Yes, okay. um I wonder, I wonder if it's possible if we could spend a minute or so like imagining, and this is an invitation also for the listeners, when we hear these stories and these experiences where we know that there's another way forward and that there's no support right now, it can be so easy for us to fall into despair and hopelessness of like nothing is possible, it's not going to happen. And I wonder if I'm invitation to the folks listening and with you, Wes, right now, what could support look like? What could support look like for folks who have experienced leaving prison and who know like what it is that people simply can't know unless they've gone through that? What could support look like? Do you want to take a second just to imagine with me? That's like an invitation.
Are you saying like support from like a family member or like
Just in
support?
general, I think support from community, support from family, support from loved ones, or even like, like self support. I think one of the things that shows up immediately just in being in conversation with you and hearing your story, I could imagine support could look like um, not assisting folks with returning to the language of emotions, like, oh, this is I'm having a panic attack, or this is anxiety, this is anger, and having spaces where we're supporting families and like the affected individual in that communication, like how do we build emotional intelligence between and within like communities who are impacted, so that they can communicate and from that space be understood and seen and heard. So it's like things like that. We don't have to find an answer right now. That was just me like, oh, it would be, I want to be able to offer something to the folks who are listening of like, oh, this is possible. Or, ooh, I never thought about how that could be supportive. Or, ooh, from my experience, I feel like the support that I could have really used is dot, dot, dot.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like that's a very heavy, um, heavy. It's something heavy to go up against.
Mm-hmm.
For people who have found themselves incarcerated, I believe that the best support that they can get from themselves is, for one, just recognizing that anyone who has not been in prison, they just can't understand you. Now, if they just did, if they wanted to, they couldn't understand you. And I see that's usually the biggest plight of someone who has been to prison is they want to be understood. They don't want to. They can see that it's a stigma on people who have been incarcerated, and we try so hard to get people to know, like, hey, I'm not that stigma. That stigma was created for whatever reasons it was created, but going to prison is not what you think. And society have been molded to think a certain type of way about someone who's been incarcerated, and it's deep rooted now into our culture, to where people can't see a person going to prison and coming home a genius. They're gonna automatically look at you like, oh, that's institutional. You institutionalize, or when you really display a certain level of intelligence, they're gonna look at you like red fish, blue fish, one fish, two fish. They're gonna make fun of your intelligence instead of recognizing that because I was in prison, I was able to master some things.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to master some things, whereas most people never had that opportunity to master some things. So all of the things that I took the time out to master, it's automatically dismissed as me being just a jail person. Like, oh, that's just jail talk, or
Mm-hmm.
it's undermined it almost. And I feel like the support from the community is just recognizing the different collateral sanctions, and recognizing that, really talk to your loved one and get to know them and understand what their needs really are. But I think that what really is happening is that when you're in prison, a lot of us gets a chance to deal with our own traumas. Whereas you come home to a society where most people are still drowning in their traumas. So to really try to get some type of support out of them is unrealistic because psychologically they're going through so much. I'm gonna give you a prime example. Um, Something that is common amongst people who come home from prison is domestic violence issues, and most men would never talk about domestic violence because it's something that they don't want. They don't want to go back to jail, so they just deal with it. And an example of what that looks like is when you come home, you're free, you're excited to be free, you've been told what to do for so long, and you want to really explore your freedom. So you might have a loved one, you might be dating a female, you might be married to a woman, and you might be like, babe, I'm about to walk to the corner store just because I can. It's sunny outside, it's beautiful. Now I'm gonna just walk to the store, I'm gonna throw my headphones on. And then that loved one will be like, well, give me a second. I'm about to throw my shoe. I'm gonna go with you. And you like, well, no, I just want to be by myself right now. I want to take it in because I know that you're not gonna be able to understand what I'm feeling. So I want to be able to take it in. So in that moment, you might not recognize that your loved one or your wife might have abandonment issues. So now you in your mind, the only thing you thinking is she don't want to see me free. She know how long I've been locked up, and she really don't want to see me free. So now it's an issue, and you trying to resolve the issue as passive as possible, but then those traumas on your loved one end comes to the surface, full steam, and now you in a full blown fight just because you wanted to walk to the store. And they're gonna impede you from walking out the door, and this is something that happens on a regular, everyday basis of men coming home from prison, but no one is gonna talk about it because they don't want to go back to jail. But and they tell you that when you come home from prison, you shouldn't be in a relationship, but the reality of it is that's the number one thing you want after you spend so many years being deprived of a woman. Man, yes, you want to be around something soft. Of course, you want to be around the epitome of a woman and all the grand things that a woman has to offer. But we face issues within those relationships that's not really on us. It be the fact that the woman we love never got a chance to deal with her issues. And here you are, you sound mind, and you are fully aware of everything that's going on around you, but your loved one might not be in that space. So they might need to be they might be the one who need the counseling, not you. But when you get into the fight with them because they're attacking you because they got issues themselves, and you go back to jail, and society is only painted that you just couldn't get it right. I've had women extort me. I've had women set me up. I've had women do the worstest things to me just because they couldn't control me. And in my family's eyes, they just looked at it like, dang, man, Wes came home and he messed up, and women would call my mother and tell them like, Wes this and Wes that. And my mother had never come to me not one time and asked me what really happened. She had just believed that woman and just started spreading messages about me that I'm this bad, terrible person. And the women not telling my mom that they extorting me, that they taking advantage of me in the way the parole system is set up. Man, all a person have to do is just call and make one phone call and say, Wes made me mad. And just like that, I'm back in prison. They're gonna put me back in prison for 90 days before they even look into the situation. So now my biggest anxiety, my biggest heartache, and my biggest pain came from being on parole. Once I seen that at any given time the parole board was willing to trip me up, or they were so willing to put me back in jail so easy, man, that's where my biggest anxiety came from. I just had the worst anxiety attacks. And now that I'm on parole, man, I haven't had an anxiety attack since. I haven't had now one, and it took me a long time to realize that because my freedom was so fickle. It was almost as if my freedom wasn't real. It was like a carrot being dangled over my head. At any given moment, they had taken it away from me, and that was my biggest issue. So going back to support, man, it's just like people who've been in prison, we got to support each other, and that's really the only support we can rely on. If anybody else is sound mentally that wants to support us, man, I accept it wholeheartedly. But it has to, for someone to support someone who's been in prison, you first have to take the stigma off of your mind of what a person looks like who's been in prison. Because the fact of the matter is, when I was in prison, it was every kind of person in prison. They make it seem like it's just one type of person in prison who messed up. They need to get their life together. And even when I talk to nonprofit organizations, they be like, uh, they have a wrong idea. Like last week, I sponsor a music program inside the institution. So I got people that really are in the music industry to come inside the prison, like people who produce with Beyonce and Drake. And I got these producers that come inside the prison, and some of the producers didn't want to come in because they had this misconception like, yeah, we need to go inside and help these guys get their mind together. And I had to let them know, like, man, this particular group of guys don't need their mind to be together. Like, these are very highly intelligent men. They've been locked up like 20 years, so they not where they was when they first got locked up. They might can help you out with some things. But it was a misconception of the guys because I had explained to them, if somebody broke into your house and you got kids in your house, you got your family, and the intruder broke in and you shot them and killed them, but because your state doesn't have self-protection laws, you go to prison. Man, what does that man need to change about his mind?
Mm.
And what ways does he need to get better when he just deal with a man that's supposed to do and protect his family? And any man who don't do that is a man who just don't have a heart to. They don't
Mm.
have the courage to protect their family. But everybody in prison are not people who are dysfunctional, who are mentally challenged, or none of those things, man. In America, it is not hard to go to prison.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all. So it's just like, to really get that support, we have to take the stigma away and the false identity of people that's in prison, and understand that there's so many different types of people in prison. It's different classes of people that's in prison. It's just not one type of person that's in prison, but society is set up that if you find yourself in prison, something is wrong with you. That's not always the case.
Mm. You provided some really wonderful examples there, and like lots of things. I'm like, oh, we could talk about that now, or we can talk about this, or talk about that. But I think what's really sticking out to me is, one, this there are limitations that we're going to have as someone who's never been incarcerated and someone who has been incarcerated. There's always going to be a limitation to what we can understand from experience. But being open to understanding the other person's experience, and then also how our own traumas might be showing up and sort of creating anxiety and greater tension within how it is that we relate to each other, is important for folks who are in relationship with someone who has been released from prison. um, Having that space of like, I can't understand what it is that you're going through, but doing your best and trusting that sometimes, I guess, like for example, um, with my father who was incarcerated, I like really just being honest, like I'm there for you, but I also might not be what you need. I
Right.
think there's that humility of like, I can love someone and I could also not be what they need. So really moving from that space of like, they need this and I love them enough for them to go get what they need.
Yeah.
That's really big. I think that that's important for any human being, period, to take. And I also want to name how that imagery you showed of like, it's like someone dangling like their freedom when you're on parole, like it's here for you, but oh, like don't step too forward because so and so can happen. That hypervigilance, your body's in constant like panic mode, like what's going to happen next. How can anyone be well if there's no grounded security, that someone just showed up. um I have two more questions, and then I think we can close off. I do not believe this will be the last time. I hope it's not the last time.
You don't have to.
Personally, um, you have been speaking a lot about the stigma, like the stigma that folks have about people in prison, and hearing you talk, I'm like, damn, even I still have stigmas. Like I thought like, oh yeah, like I'm okay. But no, I was like, damn, like, yeah, like it's so true, because we've all been conditioned to believe like people in prison look like this, people in prison do this, people are in prison in order to blah, blah, blah. And then, so there's that stigma. There's the stigma around like, once people are released, that like, oh, you are a prisoner and I know, that's air quotes by the way, like prisoner, and then I know what a prisoner is and how they should be, and they're not considering you whole human, like whole experience, like the nuance. So all these stigmas, and I want to know, and you've spoken about this a bit, so maybe it won't be as a deep deep, but how does the stigma surrounding incarceration impact individuals, or even deepen the symptoms of post incarceration syndrome?
I believe that the stigmas around people who have been in prison is the fuel behind post incarceration syndrome. I believe that the stigmas people have in their mind is what really sends a person spiraling psychologically. Like when I had to really come to grips that, man, I ain't no human no more. Like people don't respect me as a man. My family don't respect me as a man. When I try to date a female, and no matter how much good I show people, man, nobody really treat me like a man. Nobody really treat me with the full respect that I deserve. You know, even my mother asked me, like, man, why you feel like people should to respect you? And I'm like, because I respect everybody else. I would hope that people will have a sense of respect for me, seeing that I'm a kind person. That
Mm-hmm.
alone, like, I would hope that a person will have respect for me because I respect everybody. And I believe that the stigmas around in everyone's mind is what really does the damage. I believe that that's what post incarceration syndrome really is. It's the response to having to come to grips with the fact that you are no longer human.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I think that that's a trauma itself,
For sure.
to be dehumanized. That's generational trauma, that's individual trauma, um, and it's completely undeserved. Completely undeserved.
For sure.
Um, yeah. Well, if you are listening to this, and you feel impacted by this conversation in any way, shape, or form, and this is activating whatever it is that it shows up with you, like, please take care of yourself. Know that your humanity and your dignity is inherent to you, um, even if and when folks challenge it for reasons that can't be justified in any way, shape, or form. Just wanted to shed some love to folks who are listening, and also to you. Um, yeah, I think so. If stigma, I really like that clarification, or stigma being the fuel of post incarceration syndrome. And so the question I was going to ask about prevention strategies or interventions to help reduce the likelihood of that. And it seems like I want to hear your answer to that, but and to me right now, it almost seems like so much of that is about, I mean, it's everywhere. It's really like really challenging, unraveling and removing the stigmas that have been created to keep folks who have been incarcerated in prisons even when they're out. And it's the very prisons that, like, the larger society puts folks into, puts y'all into. um and I'm so yeah, I want to know more, if you know, like, what you could imagine, if stigma is the root of it, what are ways that we can rip out this root, essentially? How are what are some, and this is not, yeah,
Right.
something that you have to answer, because I think this is an ongoing conversation that we all have to be in together, but I'm curious from you. Yeah.
I believe that, you know, the stigma of people who have been to prison, it runs deep like racism,
Hmm.
you know. And I don't believe that it will be ever, I don't think this world would ever be without it. You know, like just like we'd never be without racism. And I feel like the stigma is like equivalent to racism, like the same way you got some, you know, Americans who are taught from the womb that black people are this, that, and that, is deep rooted. You know what I mean? So where,
Roots.
yeah, like it's so deep rooted. But I'm the one that I'm always down for a good fight, and I believe that we doing it. I believe that I'm doing it slowly but surely. I believe that you and I are doing it right here, right now. I don't want to overlook this moment. I'm so grateful that you are willing to open your mind. And even if no one else hears this message, the fact that you hearing it right now is a win for me. You know, the fact that you are taking the time out to want to know and to want to reposition your heart for people who are, in this position, I feel like this is a victory. This means a lot to me. I'm grateful. I'm honored. Um, and I can only do it one person at a time. I don't expect to reach everybody. And I feel like that the only people who will get it are people that's mentally healthy. That's the only type of people that I feel comfortable around. People who are healthy within their own minds. Our society our society is so unhealthy mentally, and we don't look at self-esteem as a mental health issue, and it is. Most people don't have the self-esteem to even hear these conversations or to learn more or to change their perspective. They watered down by their own traumas and their own psychological issues and everything that they facing, so they don't have the time or even the desire to even care about that. And you got people who stuck in their ways. So overall, you know, I just feel like just one person at a time. I feel like that um the way that I deal with it is I try to only surround myself with people who willing to have some type of empathy, But I understand that with um, empathy, you have to really have a certain IQ to be an empathetic person. Everyone isn't naturally empathetic. Everyone doesn't even know what empathy really is. Um, so I try to surround myself with people who have those healthy boundaries in their mind where they can empathize and really take the time out to think about more than itself, like people like yourself. So for me, that's my personal solution is to only surround myself around people that I can truly, let my hair down with. People who really care about this world and really care about um, the the mis the mistreating of other human beings, and that's just where I'm at. Being in prison, it taught me to really care about human beings, something I didn't do before. But now that I really care about people, I feel myself driving myself crazy trying to care for this world because most people don't want to be cared for. Most people they just don't. So it's like my post incarceration syndrome. One aspect of it is it's like a Superman complex. That because God delivered me, God used prison to elevate me as a person, to elevate me as spirit. Now I'm on every corner trying to scream the message of God to people, and that's what's driving me crazy because everybody not trying to be saved.
Mm,
And I try to save the world because somebody saved me. So I had the way that I mentally balance myself now is to save myself for people who really look to be saved.
mm,
And not just try to save any and everybody. And that's what's going to drive you crazy. And that's what's going to drive most people crazy. But it's hard because if you come home from prison and you got all this knowledge and information, you want to pass on this information to your kids, to your loved ones. So then when your traumas come in, that is when you realize that they don't want it. They're not trying to hear that. When you come home and you see your daughter is a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, but she dressing like she grown and she wearing leggings and all that, and you try to be like, hey, I don't think that this young girl should dress like that because she's being sexualized, and with the rate of little kids being molested, I think that the way her dress is something that can prevent her from having to experience that trauma. And people gonna be like, oh, that's the trend now. You tripping? That's jail stuff. Prison got you messed up. Whereas really, I'm just trying to save this little girl's life. I've seen every female that I've ever known be molested, and I see a little girl, and I'm trying my hardest to prevent her from having to go through that trauma that will last for the rest of her life, and no one around me will let me help this little girl. Everybody gonna treat me like I'm institutionalized and I'm just being somebody who been to prison, instead of realizing that I'm being real and I'm addressing issues that everybody is scared to address.
Mm.
You
Or
know?
that it even become so
Yeah,
normalized that folks are numb to itself.
yeah, for sure. So, for the sake of my own mental health, I am working on stop being such a Superman,
Mm.
and starting to reserve my energy for people who really want it.
Mm. That's big. That's big stuff. That's important stuff, especially I think if you're moving from a space of service. There's I think a moment that comes in everyone's journey. I've had my own where God was like, you can't. It's this is not for everyone. This is for who it's for. And the people who it's for, who want to receive your gifts, who want to receive what you have to offer to the world, are going to be wide open for you. They're
Mhm.
going to be like, please come, come. And other people who you can't save, somebody else will be there for them to help them save themselves, because we're never going to be able to save anyone. We can't save anyone outside of ourselves. We really just support people in remembering their power and remembering what is within them. And that's what shows up. And I just think I'm so grateful that you are sharing your journey with me, with everyone who's listening here. I mean, it's been so inspiring, and I look forward to continuing to hear from you and see how you grow and where you grow. And I can't wait to hear how folks receive this podcast. I want to know, if you have any closing words, including, where folks can find you, wherever that is.
My Instagram handle is WallStreet Wes GMTD. GMTD stands for my company, Great Minds Think Different. Um, and as far as closing words, I guess I can only close on a poem. I think that's just the right thing to do.
I think that's the perfect thing to do.
That's the perfect thing to do. So there won't be any joy on the journey, only when you arrive. And there is only sadness when you suffer. But when you survive, to survive is when you find your reason for being alive. So if you can just hold on, instead of pleading to die, it will be so pleasing to find that your story is not over. Though your story feels knocked over like October, you must remember that when we fall, it's only a season. And eventually that season will become something that you will savior. Ask Ruel Sailor how it feels to triumph. It is guaranteed that at some point this life will try us, only to show us who we really are, like, hi, us. And though we believe that there is a God high up, we must still look within and take inventory, alongside of praying for meekness, which is godly, and understand that pain is just weakness, leaving the body, because it is the brain that is leading the body, meaning it is what we think that keeps the feet from walking in defeat. And it is what we speak into our soul in the middle of feeling miserable will be the reason why you look into a mirror and see a miracle. So if you can just hold on, instead of giving in to a feeling to die, it will be so appealing to find that your story is not over. Though your story feels knocked over, how else will you learn to appreciate the brilliance of a brighter day? And how else will you find out that you are resilient if things became right away? And by the way, you might even help someone else get by the way that you survived. So please don't leave out those moments where you cried or even became discouraged as you tell your testimony and all its drama. Because usually after a testimony, there's a comma, meaning your story is not over. Though your story feels knocked over like a part of you is ruined, you must know That there is no one on earth who has not experienced hurt. It's just a part of being human, alongside of sometimes feeling lonely. But if only you can just hold on long enough to find out that you will be just fine. All right? Because it is usually in the darkness that's where we find our light. Palm.
And that's WallStreet Wes ministry for you. Wow. Thank you so dearly and deeply for sharing your story, for inspiring us with your story. Um, yeah, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I really look forward to seeing what else it is that God has in store for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
We would like to thank WallStreet Wes for sharing his story with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your poetry. Post-incarceration syndrome caused by the penal system is absolutely detrimental, not only to those who are incarcerated, but also to their larger communities. And so for those who are incarcerated, remember, freedom is a must. Free all lifers, and shout out to Private Spaceship. Thank you all, and never forget our mission to continue breaking the chains of injustice.